Sarah Mitchell grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She was the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher. Nothing fancy, nothing special. From the time she was young, Sarah was different from other girls in her neighborhood. While her classmates played with dolls and dressed up in princess costumes, Sarah would climb trees and race boys down the street. Her mother would shake her head and say she was too wild, too rough around the edges. In high school, things got worse for Sarah. She was tall, strong, and athletic, but that made her a target. The popular girls would whisper behind her back, calling her names and making fun of how she walked and talked. They said she was trying too hard to be one of the guys. The boys were even crueler. They would challenge her to arm wrestling matches, just to laugh when she beat them, then claim they let her win. During gym class, when Sarah would outrun or outperform the male students, they would roll their eyes and mock her. One day in her senior year, Sarah announced to her classmates that she wanted to join the military after graduation. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Laughter erupted across the cafeteria. Her classmate Jake, the star football player, stood up and said loud enough for everyone to hear that the military was no place for a girl who couldn't even handle high school drama. His friend Marcus joined in, saying she would probably cry the first time a drill sergeant yelled at her. The worst part was when someone shouted from across the room that famous phrase that would haunt her for years to come. "Don't break down, princess." The words cut through Sarah like a knife. The entire cafeteria erupted in laughter. Even some of the teachers tried to hide their smiles. That phrase became a running joke throughout her final months of high school. Anytime Sarah spoke up in class or tried to participate in sports, someone would whisper it just loud enough for her to hear. It was written on her locker. It was posted on social media. It followed her everywhere she went. Sarah's guidance. Counselor called her in for a meeting one afternoon. Mrs. Henderson was a kind woman, but even she seemed doubtful about Sarah's plans. She suggested that Sarah consider college instead. Maybe study nursing or teaching, something more suitable for a young woman. When Sarah insisted that she wanted to serve her country, Mrs. Henderson sighed deeply and pulled out pamphlets for the Air Force and Navy administrative positions. She explained that these roles would be safer and more appropriate. But Sarah didn't want safe. She didn't want appropriate. She had been doing research for months, staying up late at night reading everything she could find about military special operations. She had stumbled upon information about Navy SEALs, the most elite fighting force in the world. She learned about their impossible training, their extraordinary missions, their unbreakable brotherhood. Something deep inside her burned with desire to prove she could do what everyone said was impossible. Her father was the only person who didn't laugh at her dreams. He had served in the army for 4 years when he was young, nothing special, just a regular soldier. But he understood what military service meant. One evening, as they worked together in his garage fixing an old car, Sarah finally broke down and told him everything. She told him about the constant ridicule, the mockery, the way everyone treated her dreams like a joke. Her father put down his wrench and looked at his daughter with serious eyes. He told her that the world would always have people who doubted her, who wanted to see her fail, who couldn't imagine anyone breaking their small-minded expectations. He said the question wasn't whether those people existed, but whether Sarah would let them define her limits. He asked her a simple question that changed everything. Do you want this for you, or do you want this to prove something to them? Sarah thought about it for a long time. She realized that somewhere along the way, her dream had become tangled up with her anger and her need to prove everyone wrong. But underneath all that, there was something pure and true. She genuinely wanted to serve. She wanted to push herself to the absolute limit. She wanted to be part of something greater than herself. Yes, proving everyone wrong would be sweet, but that wasn't the core of her desire. Graduation day came and went. While her classmates posted photos of acceptance letters to universities and celebrated their future plans, Sarah quietly enlisted in the Navy. She didn't make a big announcement. She didn't post about it on social media. She simply signed the papers and began preparing herself for what was to come. The summer before she left for basic training, Sarah transformed her life. She woke up every morning at 5 and ran 5 miles. She did hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups. She swam laps at the local pool until her arms felt like they would fall off. She studied military history and memorized the general orders. Her mother worried she was pushing herself too hard, but her father understood. He would sometimes join her on morning runs, though he couldn't keep up with her pace anymore. The neighborhood kids who used to mock her would see her running past their houses in the early morning darkness. Some of them made comments, but Sarah had learned to tune them out. She had a goal now, something bigger than high school's social dynamics. Every time someone whispered princess as she passed, she added an extra mile to her run. Finally, the day came for Sarah to leave for basic training. Her parents drove her to the recruiting station, where she would catch a bus to the naval base. Her mother cried and hugged her tight, making her promise to write letters every week. Her father shook her hand firmly, then pulled her into a brief hug and whispered in her ear that he was proud of her no matter what happened. Next, as the bus pulled away from the recruiting station, Sarah watched her small town disappear in the distance. She thought about all the people who said she would fail, all the laughter, all the mockery. She made a silent promise to herself that she would never quit, no matter how hard things got. She didn't know then just how severely that promise would be tested. Basic training was tough, but not as tough as Sarah had expected. The physical challenges were hard, but she had prepared well. The mental games the instructors played were annoying, but Sarah had developed thick skin from years of bullying. She excelled in most areas, particularly in physical fitness and weapons training. Her drill instructor noticed her potential and pulled her aside one day after a particularly grueling obstacle course run. He told her that she had what it took to go further in the Navy. He mentioned special programs, advanced training, opportunities for exceptional sailors. He didn't say the words Navy SEAL directly, because at that time, women still weren't officially allowed in the program. But he planted a seed, gave her information about how to prepare, how to get noticed, how to position herself for the opportunity if it ever came. Sarah absorbed everything he told her like a sponge. After basic training, she was assigned to a ship as part of a maintenance crew. It wasn't glamorous work, but Sarah approached every task with intensity and precision. During her off hours, she continued her brutal physical training regimen. She would wake up before her shifts and work out, then work out again after her shifts ended. Her bunkmates thought she was crazy, but Sarah didn't care what they thought. Months passed. Sarah earned respect from her commanding officers and built a reputation as a reliable and exceptionally fit sailor. She took every advanced training course available to her. She volunteered for the hardest assignments. She studied tactics and strategy in her spare time. She was building toward something, though most people around her couldn't see it yet. Then came the news that changed everything. The Navy announced it was opening all combat roles to women, including the Navy SEALs. The announcement sent shockwaves through the military community. Many male sailors were skeptical, even hostile to the idea. They said women didn't belong in special operations, that they would lower standards, that it was political correctness gone mad. Sarah heard all the arguments, all the resistance, all the doubt. It sounded exactly like high school all over again. But this time, she was ready. This time, she had trained her body and mind to handle anything. This time, she wasn't the uncertain teenage girl being mocked in a cafeteria. She was a United States Navy sailor. She was about to volunteer for the hardest military training in the world. She submitted her application for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, known as BUD-S. Her commanding officer tried to talk her out of it, explaining that the attrition rate was extremely high, that most male candidates failed, that the instructors would be especially hard on any woman who attempted it. Sarah listened politely, thanked him for his concern, and insisted that her application go through. When word got around that Sarah had volunteered for SEAL training, the reactions were mixed. Some sailors respected her courage. Others openly laughed, saying she wouldn't last a week. A few male sailors who were also applying for special operations programs seemed personally offended that a woman would dare to try. They made comments about how she was wasting everyone's time, how she was taking a slot from a man who could actually complete the training. The day Sarah arrived at Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, She felt her stomach twist with nervousness for the first time in months. The base was intimidating, filled with the fittest and most determined men she had ever seen. They all looked like they were carved from stone, with expressions of absolute focus and determination. Sarah checked in with her paperwork, received her gear, and was assigned to a training class that would begin the following week. During that first week of orientation, Sarah met her fellow candidates. There were 120 men in her class, all volunteers who had made it through preliminary screenings. She was the only woman. The instructors made no special announcement about her presence, which she appreciated. They treated everyone with the same cold indifference that would characterize the next. Several months of training, the other candidates had mixed reactions to Sarah's presence. Some ignored her completely, focused only on their own preparation. A small group seemed genuinely supportive, introducing themselves and treating her like any other teammate. But there was also a vocal minority who made their feelings clear. 6 men in particular formed a tight group and made it their mission to remind Sarah daily that she didn't belong there. Their leader was a former college wrestler named Derek, who had joined the Navy specifically to become a SEAL. He was accompanied by 5 other men, all of them exceptional athletes with impressive resumes. There was Tyler, a former high school football star; Marcus, who had been a competitive swimmer; Jake, a Marine Corps veteran who had cross-trained to try for the SEALs; and to others, Connor and Brandon, both of whom had been preparing for SEAL training since they were teenagers. Derek's group would make comments whenever Sarah walked past. They would laugh and elbow each other, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. They called her Princess constantly, the same nickname that had tormented her in high school. They predicted she would quit during the first week, maybe even the first day. They made bets on when she would ring the bell, the infamous signal that a candidate was voluntarily withdrawing from training. The first day of actual training began at 4 in the morning with a brutal physical training session on the beach. The instructors, all active duty SEALs themselves, pushed the candidates through endless sets of push-ups, sit-ups, flutter kicks, and runs in the soft sand. Sarah's muscles burned and her lungs screamed, but she kept pace with the middle of the pack. She had learned not to try to be the fastest or strongest on day 1. She needed to be steady, sustainable, and smart. After physical training came breakfast, then classroom instruction, then more physical training, then obstacle courses, then ocean swims in the freezing Pacific water. The days were designed to be endless and exhausting, breaking down the candidates mentally as much as physically. By the end of the first week, 10 men had already quit. Sarah was still there, soaking wet and covered in sand. But still there. Derek's group seemed annoyed that she hadn't quit yet. They escalated their harassment, making louder comments and more aggressive predictions about her failure. During one particularly brutal obstacle course session, Tyler intentionally cut in front of Sarah at an obstacle, causing her to have to wait and lose time. When she confronted him about it later, he smirked and told her that if she couldn't handle a little competition, she should quit now. The instructors noticed everything, but said nothing. This was part of the test. They wanted to see how candidates handled adversity, conflict, and unfair treatment. The military wasn't fair, combat wasn't fair, and if a candidate couldn't handle some verbal harassment from teammates, they would never survive the real pressures of special operations. Week 2 brought the introduction of log training, where teams of candidates had to carry massive wooden logs through obstacle courses and into the ocean. The logs weighed hundreds of pounds and required perfect coordination among the team members. Sarah was assigned to a boat crew with 6 other men, including 2 members of Derek's group, Tyler and Connor. From the first log exercise, Tyler and Connor made it clear they considered Sarah a liability. They would deliberately shift their grip on the log to put extra weight on her side. They would speed up suddenly or change direction without warning, trying to throw her off balance. During breaks, they would complain loudly about how the team would be faster without dead weight slowing them down. Sarah gritted her teeth and endured. She knew responding to their provocations would only make things worse. Instead, she focused on maintaining her position, keeping her portion of the weight, and refusing to be the weak link they expected her to be. Her boat cruise times weren't the fastest, but they weren't the slowest either. The instructors seemed satisfied with their performance. which only frustrated Tyler and Connor more. The third week introduced Hell Week, the legendary 5.5-day period where candidates get almost no sleep while enduring constant physical and mental torture. Hell Week is where most candidates quit. The instructors tell every class that they're not trying to kill anyone, but they are trying to find out who wants to quit. The brass bell that signals withdrawal sits in the center of the compound, always visible, always tempting. Hell Week began on a Sunday evening with an event called Breakout, where instructors use explosions, gunfire, and chaos to shock candidates into the realization that their comfortable lives are over. For the next 5 days, Sarah and her classmates would be pushed beyond any limit they thought they had. The first night was the worst. Candidates were forced into the ocean repeatedly, then made to roll in sand until they looked like human sandpaper. They did exercises on the beach while instructors sprayed them with hoses. They carried boats on their heads until their necks felt like they would snap. They ran miles in wet boots that gave them blisters on top of blisters. And through it all, the instructors screamed at them, telling them how easy it would be to just ring the bell and go get hot coffee and donuts by the first morning of Hell Week. 15 more men had quit, including 2 members of Derek's group. Brandon had made it barely 8 hours before ringing the bell, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Connor lasted until midday Monday before deciding he'd had enough. That left Derek, Tyler, Jake, and Marcus still in training. Along with Sarah and about 90 other men, Derek's group seemed to take the loss of their friends personally, as if Sarah's survival was somehow an insult to Brandon and Connor's sacrifice. Their harassment intensified despite their own exhaustion. During a particularly brutal paddle in the ocean, Derek engineered a situation where Sarah's boat crew was separated from the main group. He convinced Tyler and Jake to help him capsize Sarah's boat, making it look like an accident. The boat flipped in the freezing Pacific water, dumping Sarah and her crew into the waves. They had to right the boat and climb back in while instructors screamed at them for being incompetent. Sarah knew it hadn't been an accident, but she said nothing, proving it would be impossible. And complaining would only make her look weak. Tuesday night of Hell Week was called Around the World, where candidates paddled their boats on an endless journey along the coast. The cold was unbearable. The paddling was exhausting, and the sleep deprivation had reached levels where candidates started hallucinating. Sarah saw lights that weren't there, heard voices calling her name, felt like she was moving through a dream world where nothing was quite real. Wednesday brought some relief, as the intensity of Hell Week typically decreases slightly to prevent actual medical emergencies, but the exhaustion was cumulative. Sarah's hands were shredded from rope burns and blisters. Her body was covered in bruises. Her lips were cracked from the salt water. She literally could not remember the last time she had slept for more than 20 minutes, but she was still there, still moving, still refusing to quit. And that fact was driving Derek and his remaining friends absolutely crazy. They had bet that she would quit during Hell Week. They had told everyone that there was no way a woman could survive the crucible that broke most men. And yet here she was, covered in sand and blood and salt, still putting one foot in front of the other. Thursday morning, Derek tried a different tactic. During a break, he approached Sarah with what seemed like genuine concern. He told her that she had already proven her point, that everyone respected what she had accomplished, that she could quit now with honor. He said that even the instructors would understand that pushing herself further was just stubbornness and pride. He made it sound reasonable, like quitting was actually the smart and mature choice. Sarah looked at Derek with eyes that were bloodshot from exhaustion and salt water. She knew exactly what he was doing. It was a more sophisticated version of the mockery she had endured her whole life. She told him in a voice rough from screaming and cold that she didn't care what he thought. What anyone thought, that she was there for herself and no one else. Derek's friendly mask slipped, and his real feelings showed through. He told her that she was going to get someone killed in the real teams because she was too weak, too slow, too much of a liability. He said that if she had any honor or sense of responsibility, she would quit before she became a burden to actual warriors. His voice was filled with genuine anger and frustration. Sarah turned away from him without responding. She had learned that some people would never accept her, never respect her, never see her as an equal. Derek was one of those people. Trying to reason with him or prove herself to him was pointless. The only thing that mattered was finishing the training and earning the trident, the symbol of a Navy SEAL. Friday came and Hell Week was almost over. The end was in sight. Candidates who had survived this long typically made it to the end. As the final hours were designed to be a celebration of their toughness rather than a final elimination, Sarah allowed herself to feel a tiny spark of hope that she was actually going to make it. Hell, the week ended on Friday afternoon with a ceremony where the surviving candidates were finally allowed to rest. Out of the 120 who had started, only 62 remained. Sarah had made it. She had survived the most grueling 5 days of her life. As she sat on the beach wrapped in a blanket, her whole body trembling from exhaustion and cold, she felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pure relief and triumph. The instructors gathered the survivors and told them they should be proud. They had done what most people would consider impossible, but they also warned that Hell Week was just the beginning. The real training was still ahead. They would spend months learning combat diving, land warfare, weapons, tactics, and demolitions. Many more candidates would fail in the weeks and months to come. The trident was still far away. Derek, Tyler, Jake, and Marcus had all survived Hell Week as well. Sarah could see the frustration in their eyes every time they looked at her. They had been so certain she would quit, had invested so much emotional energy in anticipating her failure, that her success felt like a personal defeat to them. Their harassment didn't stop after Hell Week, but it did change. They seemed to realize that simple mockery wasn't going to break her. So they tried subtler forms of sabotage. During dive training, which was considered one of the most dangerous phases of SEAL qualification, Derek's group would find small ways to make things harder for Sarah. They would accidentally bump into her in the pool, disrupting her breathing rhythm. They would give her incorrect information about procedures, then act innocent when she made mistakes. They would spread rumors that she was getting special treatment from instructors. Turning other candidates against her, the dive phase was brutal in its own way. Candidates had to learn to use closed-circuit rebreathers that left no bubbles, useful for covert operations. The training involved being harassed underwater by instructors who would turn off air supplies, rip off masks, and tie breathing hoses in knots. Candidates had to solve these problems calmly while underwater, without panicking or surfacing. Panic meant failure. Sarah struggled with dive training more than she had with the physical challenges. There was something terrifying about being deep underwater, unable to breathe, with instructors actively trying to make her panic. Her heart would race, her lungs would burn, and every instinct in her body would scream at her to surface and breathe. But she forced herself to stay calm, to follow her training, to trust her equipment and her skills. One day during a particularly difficult dive exercise, Tyler swam up behind Sarah and disconnected her air supply in a way that the instructors couldn't see. It wasn't part of the official harassment that was built into the training. It was a genuine attempt to make her panic and fail. Sarah felt her air stop flowing and knew immediately that something was wrong. Instead of panicking, she calmly located the problem, reconnected her air supply, and continued the exercise. After the dive, Sarah confronted Tyler in the locker room. She told him that what he had done was dangerous and could have killed her. Tyler denied everything, claiming it must have been an accident or part of the instructor's harassment. But Sarah had seen the deliberate way he had moved behind her, the calculated timing of the sabotage. She warned him that if he tried something like that again, she would report him to the instructors, regardless of the consequences. Tyler laughed in her face and told her that reporting him would only prove she couldn't handle the teams. He said that SEALs had to trust each other with their lives, and if she couldn't even handle a little hazing from her fellow candidates, how could anyone trust her in combat? It was an effective argument, and Tyler knew it. In the SEAL culture, complaining about mistreatment was seen as weakness. Sarah was trapped between enduring dangerous sabotage and being labeled as someone who couldn't take it. She chose to endure, but she also became more vigilant. She double-checked her equipment constantly, She kept her distance from Derek's group whenever possible. She built relationships with other candidates who seemed trustworthy and might have her back if things got worse. A few men in her class had proven themselves to be genuine teammates, and Sarah made sure to support them as much as they supported her. The training continued for months. After dive phase came land warfare, where candidates learned combat tactics, weapons handling, and small unit operations. This was where Sarah began to truly shine. Her shooting skills were exceptional, her tactical thinking was sharp, and her ability to operate as part of a team was obvious. The instructors noticed and began giving her more responsibilities during exercises. This new development infuriated Derek's group even more. They had expected Sarah to wash out during dive phase, and when she didn't, they had convinced themselves that she was only surviving because instructors were going easy on her. But now she was actually excelling, performing better than many of the male candidates. And there was no way to explain that away as special treatment. During one land warfare exercise, candidates were divided into teams and sent on a long-range navigation course through the mountains. Sarah was made a team leader, responsible for navigating her group to several checkpoints before returning to base. Derek, Tyler, Jake, and Marcus were assigned to her team, along with 3 other men who were neutral toward her. From the start of the exercise, Derek's group undermined Sarah's leadership. They questioned her navigation decisions, deliberately moved slowly to make the team fall behind schedule, complained loudly about her leadership. Sarah tried to stay professional, giving clear orders and sticking to her planned route, but the constant resistance was exhausting, especially on top of the physical demands of carrying a heavy pack through mountainous terrain. At one point, Derek suggested an alternate route that he claimed would be faster. Sarah checked her map and knew his route would actually take them off course and waste valuable time. She overruled him and insisted the team follow her original plan. Derek made a show of reluctantly agreeing, then spent the next hour making comments about how they would fail because of Sarah's poor leadership. When Sarah's team arrived at the final checkpoint, ahead of schedule and with perfect navigation, the instructors praised her leadership and tactical decision-making. Derek and his friends were silent during the debrief, their faces dark with resentment. They had tried to sabotage her success and had failed. Worse, they had made themselves look bad in front of the instructors by questioning a leader who turned out to be completely correct. After that exercise, the instructors seemed to take special notice of the dynamics between Sarah and Derek's group. They started assigning exercises specifically designed to force teamwork and cooperation between candidates who had conflicts. During one particularly memorable exercise, the entire class was required to complete a timed obstacle course, but if even one candidate failed to finish, the entire class would have to repeat it. Derek's group saw an opportunity. If they could somehow make Sarah fail the obstacle course, everyone would blame her for the class having to repeat it. They positioned themselves at key obstacles and planned to subtly interfere with her progress. But they hadn't counted on the other candidates, the ones who had come to respect Sarah. Noticing what was happening and intervening, when Tyler tried to block Sarah at the rope climb, another candidate named Chris physically moved him aside and helped Sarah maintain her pace. When Jake attempted to give Sarah wrong directions at a navigation point, a candidate named Marcus called him out loudly enough for instructors to hear. The rest of the class had decided that Sarah had earned her place, and they weren't going to let a few bitter men drag everyone down. Sarah completed the obstacle course with time to spare, and the entire class passed the exercise. The instructors said nothing about the obvious conflicts they had witnessed, but their knowing looks suggested they understood exactly what had happened. In the SEAL teams, trust and teamwork were everything. Candidates who couldn't put aside personal conflicts for the good of the mission weren't. SEAL material. As training progressed into its final phases, the attrition continued. More candidates washed out for various reasons, unable to handle the academic requirements, failing safety standards, or simply deciding the SEAL life wasn't for them. Jake from Derek's group failed a critical dive exam and was removed from training. That left only Derek, Tyler, and Marcus, still pursuing their vendetta against Sarah. The final phase of training involved intense practical exercises that simulated real combat operations. Candidates conducted mock raids, practiced hostage rescues, and learned advanced demolitions. The final weeks of training approached. The tension between Sarah and the remaining members of Derek's group reached its peak. Only 38 candidates remained from the original 120 who had started. Every single one of them was exhausted, pushed to their absolute limits physically and mentally. The finish line was in sight, but the instructors warned them that the final tests would be the hardest yet. The culminating exercise was called the Final Training Operation. It involved a complex multi-day mission that would test everything the candidates had learned. They would be divided into small teams, given minimal information, and expected to plan and execute an operation against a heavily defended target. The exercise would involve long-range navigation, combat diving, land warfare, and direct action. It was designed to simulate a real-world SEAL mission as closely as possible. Sarah was assigned to lead a 4-person team. To her surprise and dismay, Derek, Tyler, and Marcus were assigned to her team. It was obvious the instructors were doing this deliberately, forcing them to finally work together or fail spectacularly. Sarah understood the test within the test. In real SEAL teams, you didn't get to choose who you worked with. You had to be able to function effectively with anyone, even people you didn't like. The mission briefing was brief and realistic. Sarah's team had to infiltrate a coastal compound, gather intelligence on enemy forces, and exfiltrate without being detected. They had 48 hours to plan and execute the mission. Failure would likely mean all 4 of them would be dropped from training this close to graduation. When Sarah sat down with Derek, Tyler, and Marcus to begin planning, the atmosphere was icy. For the first few minutes, no one spoke. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. She told them that she knew they didn't like her, didn't respect her, and didn't want her on their team. She said all of that was fine. But she also said that she was going to complete this mission and earn her trident, and they could either help her or they could fail together. Derek leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah for a long moment. She could see him calculating, weighing his options. His hatred of her was warring with his desire to become a SEAL. Finally, he spoke. He said that for the duration of this mission, they would put aside their personal issues and operate as a professional team. But he made it clear that once the mission was over, once they had their tridents, things between them would remain unfinished. Sarah accepted those terms. It wasn't friendship, but it was a functional working relationship. They began planning the mission in earnest, and Sarah discovered something interesting. When Derek wasn't focused on undermining her, he was actually a skilled operator with good tactical instincts. Tyler was an excellent swimmer and expert at underwater navigation. Marcus had sharp eyes and exceptional situational awareness. They were all talented in their own ways, which was why they had made it this far. Over the next 12 hours, Sarah's team developed a detailed plan. They would insert via combat dive 2 miles from the target, approach underwater to avoid detection, conduct reconnaissance from concealed positions, and then exfiltrate the same way they came in. Sarah divided responsibilities based on each team member's strengths. Derek would handle communications and coordination. Tyler would navigate the dive. Marcus would gather and document intelligence. Sarah would lead the overall operation and make tactical decisions. When they presented their plan to the instructors, they received approval to proceed. The instructors said nothing about the obvious tension in the team, but Sarah noticed them exchanging meaningful glances. They knew exactly what test they had set up, and they were interested to see how it would play out. The mission began at dusk. Sarah's team geared up in silence, checking and rechecking their equipment. Each man was wrapped up in his own thoughts, his own fears and hopes. They had come so far, endured so much. Everything they had worked for came down to the next 48 hours. The dive insertion went smoothly. Tyler's navigation was flawless, bringing them to exactly the right position offshore from the target compound. They swam underwater for over an hour, their closed-circuit rebreathers leaving no bubbles to give away their position. When they finally surfaced in the dark water and saw the compound lit up on the shore ahead, Sarah felt her heart pounding with adrenaline. They spent the next 6 hours in the cold ocean water, taking turns observing the compound through night vision devices and documenting enemy patrol patterns. It was miserable work, treading water in the dark while trying to remain absolutely silent and invisible. But the team functioned well. Derek relayed information efficiently. Marcus took detailed notes. Tyler monitored their position and ensured they didn't drift. Sarah coordinated everything and made adjustments to their plan based on what they observed. As dawn approached, they executed their exfiltration, diving back under the surface and swimming the long route back to their extraction point. Physically, it was one of the hardest things Sarah had ever done. Her body was numb from hours in the cold water. Her muscles were exhausted from treading water and swimming. But mentally, she felt sharp and focused. She had led a successful operation, and even Derek couldn't deny that. When they finally reached shore at the extraction point, cold, exhausted, and waterlogged, they collapsed on the beach. For a moment, they just lay there breathing heavily. Then Tyler started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that came from relief and exhaustion. Marcus joined in, and then even Derek cracked a smile. Sarah felt something shift between them. They had accomplished something difficult together, relied on each other when it mattered. It wasn't friendship, but it was something. The instructors were waiting at the extraction point. They reviewed the intelligence Sarah's team had gathered and evaluated their performance. After a tense few minutes of discussion among the instructors, the head instructor announced that the mission was a complete success. Sarah's team had executed flawlessly, gathering high-quality intelligence without being detected. They had passed the final test, back at the compound. The exhausted candidates were given 24 hours to rest before the graduation ceremony. Sarah barely remembered falling into her bunk and sleeping for 14 hours straight. When she woke up, her body was sore in places she didn't know could be sore, but her mind was clear. She had done it. She had actually done it. Graduation day was surreal. Sarah stood in formation with the 38 candidates who had survived the entire training pipeline. Their families were there, watching proudly. Sarah's parents had flown in from across the country. Her mother was crying happy tears, and her father stood tall with obvious pride. Sarah could see in his eyes that this moment meant almost as much to him as it did to her. The commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare gave a speech about the tradition of the Navy SEALs, about the extraordinary men, and now, for the first time, a woman who had earned the right to wear the trident. He talked about sacrifice, dedication, and the willingness to never quit no matter how hard things got. He said that the candidates who had survived this training were proof that human potential was limitless when combined with determination. Then came the moment Sarah had dreamed about for years. One by one, the candidates stepped forward to receive their trident pins. When Sarah's name was called, she walked forward with her head high. The commanding officer shook her hand, looked her in the eye, told her she had earned this through blood, sweat, and absolute refusal to quit. He pinned the golden trident on her uniform, the symbol that marked her as a United States Navy SEAL. The audience applauded, but Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking about every person who had told her she couldn't do this, every teacher who had suggested safer paths, every classmate who had mocked her dreams, every voice that had said women didn't belong in special operations. They had all been wrong. After the ceremony, as families mingled with the newly minted SEALs, Derek approached Sarah. She tensed, unsure what he wanted. He stood there for a moment, seeming to struggle with words. Finally, he said that what she had accomplished was remarkable. She had earned her place, and that he respected her as an operator. He didn't apologize for the months of harassment, didn't acknowledge the sabotage and cruelty. But his admission of respect was something Sarah had never expected to hear from him. She nodded, and accepted his words without adding anything of her own. Some wounds were too deep for simple words to heal, but this was at least a beginning of acknowledgement. Tyler and Marcus also approached separately, offering brief congratulations that seemed genuine if uncomfortable. They weren't friends, might never be friends, but they were all SEALs now. They would be part of the same brotherhood. Sarah's mother hugged her so tight she could barely breathe, crying and saying how proud she was, how amazed she was by her daughter's strength. Her father shook her hand formally, then pulled her into a hug and whispered that she had done exactly what he always knew she could do. They asked her what came next, what her assignment would be, whether the hard part was over. Sarah smiled and explained that in many ways, the hard part was just beginning. She would be assigned to a SEAL team, would train with them for months before being considered deployable, would have to prove herself all over again to a new group of operators. Some of them would accept her immediately. Others would need to see her perform in training and possibly in combat before they truly trusted her. But she was ready for it. She had been preparing for this her whole life. Several weeks after graduation, Sarah reported to her first SEAL team. The reception was mixed as she had expected. Some of the experienced SEALs welcomed her professionally and seemed genuinely interested in seeing what she could do. Others were openly skeptical, making it clear they didn't think women belonged in the teams regardless of what training they had completed. Sarah understood that talk was cheap. She would prove herself through actions, just as she always had. During her first major training exercise with the team, Sarah was assigned to a squad that would conduct a simulated hostage rescue. The exercise was designed to be as realistic as possible, with live ammunition, pyrotechnics, and role players acting as hostages and terrorists. Sarah's squad included several former Marines who had cross-trained into the SEALs. Men who came from a military culture that had been slower to integrate women into combat roles. The raid went perfectly. Sarah's squad moved through the building with precision, clearing rooms and neutralizing threats. When they reached the room where the hostages were held, Sarah was the first through the door, engaging role-player enemies with accurate fire while her teammates secured the hostages. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes from start to finish. It was textbook perfect. After the exercise, the squad leader, a grizzled veteran named Chief Martinez, pulled Sarah aside. She braced herself for criticism or skepticism. Instead, he told her that her performance had been outstanding. She had moved and shot like a seasoned operator, and that he was glad to have her on his squad. He said that actions spoke louder than words, and her actions had spoken very clearly. Word of Sarah's performance spread through the team. The men who had been openly skeptical became less hostile, more willing to give her a chance. A few even apologized for prejudging her, admitting they had assumed she had been given special treatment during training. Sarah accepted their apologies gracefully, understanding that changing minds took time and evidence. One day, several months into her time with the team, Sarah was in the team's common area when a group of new candidates arrived for a tour of the compound. They were young men preparing to start SEAL training, eager and nervous and full of questions. One of them noticed Sarah and did a double take, clearly surprised to see a woman in a SEAL team space. The young candidate worked up his courage and approached Sarah. He asked if she was actually a SEAL, or if she worked in a support role. Sarah showed him her trident and confirmed that she had completed the full Bud-S course and was a qualified operator. The candidate's eyes went wide with amazement. He said that when he told his friends he was going to try for the SEALs, they had laughed at him because he was short and not as naturally athletic as some other guys. He asked Sarah how she had handled all the doubt and mockery. Sarah thought about her answer carefully. She told him that the people who doubted him didn't matter. What mattered was whether he believed in himself and was willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goal. She said that training would be harder than anything he could imagine, that he would want to quit 1,000 times, that there would be moments when continuing seemed impossible. But if he had a strong enough reason for being there, a purpose that went beyond proving others wrong, he would find the strength to keep going. The young candidate thanked her and walked away looking thoughtful. Sarah watched him go and hoped he would make it through training. The teams needed people who wanted it for the right reasons, who understood that being a SEAL wasn't about glory or ego, but about service and sacrifice. As Sarah's first year with the teams progressed, she deployed overseas on actual missions. She experienced combat for the first time, the strange mixture of terror and focus that came from being shot at by real enemies. She performed well under pressure, staying calm and executing her training. Her teammates came to trust her completely, knowing she would be there when things got dangerous. Years passed. Sarah rose through the ranks, earning respect not just as the first woman to complete SEAL training, but as a skilled and reliable operator. She received commendations for her performance in combat. She was invited to speak at military academies and leadership conferences. She became a mentor to other women who wanted to pursue special operations careers. She occasionally thought about the people who had mocked her back in high school, wondered where they were now and whether they had heard about what she had accomplished. She imagined them seeing news articles about the first female Navy SEAL, maybe recognizing her name, maybe feeling a twinge of regret for how they had treated her. But those thoughts came less and less frequently as time went on, because Sarah had learned the most important lesson of all. She hadn't become a SEAL to prove anything to the people who doubted her. She had done it for herself, to discover the limits of her own potential, to serve her country at the highest level possible. The mockery and doubt had been obstacles to overcome, but they hadn't been her motivation. Her motivation had come from within, from a deep desire to be part of something greater than herself. On a quiet evening at the team compound, Sarah stood looking at the wall where the tridents of fallen SEALs were mounted, a somber reminder of the price of service. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a small town where everyone said she would fail to this moment, standing as a United States Navy SEAL, she thought about Hell Week, about Derek and his friends, about every person who had said she couldn't do it. And she smiled. Because they had all been wrong, she had been right. And that was all that mattered. The doubt, the mockery, the phrase that had haunted her through high school, "Don't break down, princess." She hadn't broken down. She had risen up. She had defeated not just 6 Marines who had doubted her, but every limitation that others had tried to place on her potential. Sarah knew that her story would inspire others, would help open doors for women who came after her. That mattered. But what mattered even more was that she had proven something to herself. She had looked at an impossible goal, had endured mockery and sabotage and physical torture, and had achieved it anyway. That knowledge lived deep in her bones now, unshakable and permanent. She was a Navy SEAL. She had earned it, and nobody could ever take that away from her. The princess they had mocked in high school had become a warrior they had to respect. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't revenge at all, but simply becoming so undeniably excellent that doubt became irrelevant. Sarah had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, and she would carry it with her for the rest of her life. As she walked back to her barracks that evening, Sarah made a silent promise to every young person who had ever been told they couldn't achieve their dreams. She promised to keep serving, keep excelling, keep breaking down barriers. Because representation mattered. Possibility mattered. And sometimes, all it took was one person refusing to quit to change what the world believed was impossible.